Hello and welcome to my channel. Right now, if you're following along, we are reading, it is, publication, it's called Serial Murder, Multi-Disciplinary Perspectives for Investigators, Behavior Analysis Unit, National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. It says Behavior Analysis Unit 2, National Center for Analysis of Violent Crime, Critical Incident Response Group, Federal Bureau of Investigation. And it lists over here on the left-hand side the editors, the co-editors, the contributors, and it's very interesting. So many contributors. And then it's got a list of the table of contents, and it goes on. And it's pretty long, and you can print it for a PDF. It has a view printable version, and you can save it. And a lot of people, they like to read and study things, and they prefer to listen to it than to read it, or they like to read it with other people. So I thought, well, I'm reading this, and I find it very interesting. So today we are right here, medical examiners, coroners. It says a thorough autopsy and the subsequent collection of evidence are critical in serial murder investigations. Medical examiners and coroners operate according to their different state mandates and vary as to the thoroughness of their investigations. Consistent procedures to collect, record, and retrieve case information are important in linking cases in other jurisdictions. The following recommendations were made concerning medical examiners in serial murder investigations. Medical examiners should share information on autopsies and potential related cases. Joint meetings with investigators can provide additional background information on these cases. A single medical examiner should be utilized in serial cases occurring within the same jurisdiction. And a medical examiner, they notice things that they may not put in their report, but they might have it in their notes. And so they can share these notes and this information if they have the joint meetings. And it's something that you might not otherwise get the information for if you didn't have the joint meetings. Once a series has been identified that involves several jurisdictions, the various medical examiner offices may consider performing joint autopsy procedures to ensure continuity in evidence collection. Investigators should also ensure submissions of all unidentified victims to the FBI Laboratory's National Missing Persons DNA database. Investigators should also ensure the entry of unidentified remains recovered into the National Crime Information Center, NCIC, and VICAP administrative issues. Law enforcement agencies should review their current administrative policies relating to maintenance and storage of unsolved homicide case materials. Top priority should be given to these cases by extending the storage time limit and may include the following. Mirror the FBI's NCAVC 50-year minimum mandate to keep copies of all unsolved cases. Retain records of unsolved homicide cases in the accompanying evidence until the case is closed. Records should be electronically converted. Evidence storage should be available for long-term storage of forensic evidence in murder cases. Submit cases to the FBI's VICAP database, which maintains case information indefinitely. Resources and finances. It is essential that an investigative agency have the resources available in order to establish the initial setup for a task force. Both from financial and logistic perspectives, there should be a contingency plan in place to handle the resource issues in a major investigation. Buildings, office space, computers, phones, vehicles, food, and other necessities should be considered in the plans. All of that should be considered. You can't say, oh, I want to consider this, but I don't want to consider that. Let's leave that out. No, consider it all. Utilizing non-law enforcement agencies such as the fire department for use of their high-tech equipment may also be included in the plan. It was recommended that agencies develop emergency response plans and establish MOUs at the local, state, and national level. Training. Training continues to be an issue for all law enforcement departments. Complex homicide investigations, especially those involving serial murder cases, depend upon the experience and abilities of investigators to effectively conduct the investigation. With the retirement of many experienced homicide investigators, newer investigators need training and exposure to a wide range of investigative techniques. Attendees also suggested the utilization of standardized training for homicide investigators, crime analysts, and medical examiners. Office assistance programs. The brutality of the crime scenes, the senseless, repetitive acts inflicted on the victims, and a sense of helplessness and failing to catch the offender are all factors that may impact the emotional well-being of investigators involved in a serial murder case. Burnout, stress, and hopelessness are just some of the feelings that may affect members of the investigative team. And I would imagine that they have nightmares, or they're just sitting there doing something and then it comes to their mind, and then all of a sudden, it's just like I don't know, what do you call it? It's why can't I remember the term? You know how people go and they go to war and they come back and they have this stress disorder. It's where it just comes and it hits you, but I can't remember the term right now, and it'll come to me later when I'm not talking about it. But yeah, because it hits you. You may not even, because you're investigating this case, you can't help but get emotionally attached to the victims, and you want to give the families closure, but then sometimes it impacts your life in ways that you wouldn't otherwise understand. Gosh, I can't remember the term, but yeah, it'll come to me later. To combat these issues, attendees suggested the following: regular debriefings, access to critical incident counselors, mental health evaluations upon request, adequate time off for investigators. What is it, PTSD or something like that? Maybe it's PTSD. You could have panic attacks and stuff too, so I would imagine. Note the majority of attendees agreed there should be published general guide to serial murder investigations. I'm surprised they don't have, like, you have AA and you have NA. I'm surprised they don't have, like, and people have group meetings who have lost loved ones. I'm surprised they don't have, like, group meetings for investigators that go through stress to talk about the situation. Anyway, the majority of attendees agreed there should be a published general guide to serial murder investigations, building upon the Multi-Agency Investigative Team Manual, MAIT, and addressing specific issues such as cooperative investigative modeled investigative methods, case linkage, crime scene techniques, MOUs, training for police, medical examiners, and crime analysts. The role of regional intelligence centers, the integration of BAU and VICAP, and the role of the federal law enforcement. Whoops. You might want to read that book. It might be interesting. The forensic sciences have played a key role in criminal investigations for many years. Recently, there has been increased attention on the forensic sciences by law enforcement, prosecutors, and the general public, particularly in high-profile cases. Intense media coverage concerning evidence issues and the work of crime laboratories has served to heighten this interest. In the past 2 decades, there have been tremendous technological advances in the laboratory testing of forensic samples. There have also been a number of improvements in the identification and collection of evidence at the crime scene, through innovative processing and evidence collection methods. Can you imagine years ago, people are going around and they're committing crimes when they didn't have the DNA testing and they didn't have things like this, and they're thinking, oh, they're going to get away with it, and then they think, oh yeah, the body's been sitting there, there's no evidence, they're never going to get caught, right? And then years go by, and then all of a sudden, poof, they're testing the DNA and they're caught. And they're like, uh-oh, they thought they were so smart, they thought they were so clever. So imagine what the future will hold that people haven't even considered or thought of or took into account that are committing crimes. Now, together these, and they think they're so clever and they're so smart. Together these advances allow for a greater probability of successful recovery and analysis of evidence that was previously possible. There is also growing recognition by criminal justice professionals of the wider scope of forensic techniques and available tests. The field of forensic, whoa, I don't know what that word is. Dio, yeah, yeah, acid. Anyway, DNA analysis and the legislation that allows DNA testing of a broader number of offenders has made some of the more remarkable advances. DNA testing now allows much smaller samples of biological material to be analyzed and the results to be more discriminating. DNA testing of forensic crime scene samples can now be compared against a database of known offenders and other unresolved crimes. So they have a database where they can take that DNA testing and they can take the samples and they can compare it in the database. Forensic laboratories have developed advanced analytical techniques through the use of computer technologies. Systems such as the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, various automated fingerprint identification systems, AFIS, and the National Integrated Ballistics Identification Network, NIBIN, were identified in the symposium as beneficial to serial murder investigations by providing links between previous unrelated cases. And that is just incredible that they have these types of things now where people can use them to solve the cases where they didn't have them before. CODIS is a national automated DNA information processing and telecommunication systems that was developed to link biological evidence DNA in criminal cases between various jurisdictions around the United States. Samples in CODIS include DNA profiles obtained from persons convicted of designated crimes, DNA profiles obtained from crime scenes, DNA profiles from unidentified human remains, and DNA from voluntary samples taken from families of missing persons. The CODIS databank of these samples is comprised of 3 different indices, or levels. The National DNA Index System, NDIS, the State DNA Index System, SDIS, and the Local DNA System, LDIS. So there's a chart. What is important for law enforcement to understand is that information contained at the LDIS and SDIS levels may not automatically be sent to or searched against the NDIS level. There are different legislation requirements for inclusions into NDIS than to LDIS and SDIS, and not all LDIS and SDIS profiles are sent to NDIS. Even when NDIS is queried, individual SDIS databanks may not be queried. Therefore, when dealing with a serial murder case, investigators need to contact their LDIS or SDIS level representatives to ensure that in addition to the NDIS databank, samples are compared to the individual SDIS databanks of each state that is of investigative interest. In cases where there is only a partial DNA profile, a national keyboard search can be requested through the NDIS custodian, CODIS unit, FBI laboratory. AFIS is an electronic databank that compares unidentified, latent, and patent fingerprints to the known fingerprint profile. There have been a variety of local AFIS systems in use since the 1980s. In 1999, The FBI's Integrated Automatic Fingerprint Identification System, or IAFIS, became operational. IAFIS is designated as the National Repository of Criminal Histories, Fingerprints, and Photographs of Criminal Subjects in the United States. It also contains fingerprints and information on military and civilian federal employees. IAFIS provides positive identification through comparisons of individuals based on the submission of fingerprint data through both 10-print fingerprint cards and Latin fingerprints. Some of the early AFIS systems were not compatible with the IAFIS system, and as a result, those earlier Latin fingerprints may not be included in IAFIS. This becomes an issue in serial murder cases when the offender committed offenses prior to the inception of IAFIS, as Latin fingerprints from those earlier crimes will not be searchable. If there is a possibility the offender committed earlier crimes, the early AFIS systems need to be queried independently. Consultation with laboratory fingerprint experts may be necessary in order to establish what AFIS systems exist, which are interoperable, and the protocols required to query each system. NIBIN is the national bank of both projectile and cartridge information. NIBIN is the integration of two previous systems, the FBI's drug fire cartridge case imaging system and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives ATF integrated ballistic identification systems. BIS. NIBIN is an imaging system that allows both bullets and cartridges recovered from a crime scene to be compared electronically against other bullets and cartridges recovered from previous crime scenes in an effort to link previous unrelated cases. The system can search by geographic area or nationwide depending upon the course of the investigation. ATF is maintaining the new system in over 75 locations across the United States. When conducting serial murder investigations, it is important for investigators to promptly seek guidance from appropriate forensic database experts. Such experts can provide information regarding what limitations exist and what additional queries can be made on the systems to obtain additional investigative information. Another area in which forensic science can play an important role is the recovery and examination of trace evidence. Trace evidence is described as small, often microscopic material. It commonly includes hair and fiber evidence, but may encompass almost any substance of material. Trace evidence may prove important lead information pertaining to offender characteristics, vehicle and tire descriptors, and environmental clues that relate to killing scenes and modes of transportation used to move bodies. A skilled trace evidence examiner can compare the trace evidence from all of the victims in a serial murder case in an effort to identify evidence common to all the victims. The trace evidence will reflect a common environment with which all of the victims were in contact. This common environment will repeat an object in the serial offender's world, such as his vehicles and/or residence. This can demonstrate that all of the victims had contact with the offender in the same locations. Attendees at the Serial Murder Symposium universally acknowledge that serial murder cases present unique circumstances and concerns, particularly when multiple investigative jurisdictions are involved in serial murder cases. Crime scenes may occur in different law enforcement jurisdictions, each of whom may possess varying resources and abilities to process crime scenes. In some cases, agencies submit evidence to different laboratories, even though those agencies are located adjacent to one another. These issues degrade the ability of law enforcement to consistently collect evidence from a murder series. They may prevent identifying a serial killer or forensically linking previously unrelated cases to a common offender. And you imagine, like, one person may be allergic to peanut butter, and somebody else may be eating peanut butter all the time. So if you had a serial killer that's eating peanut butter all the time, maybe they have a certain brand that they like, or they may have special things. They may smoke certain cigars or certain cigarettes, and you never know what kind of information they're going to find. So I would imagine, the carpet fibers, maybe that's in their vehicle or their house, or because you carry things with you as you go along, so you never know what they're going to find. Maybe deodorant, perfume, colognes, I don't know, sweat. Really don't know what they find, but it's very interesting to imagine all the different possibilities that there are. Attendees identified, imagine even maybe their favorite soda pop if they're drinking it, if they get it somewhere. I don't know. I have no idea. Attendees identified a number of forensic issues facing the law enforcement community in a serial murder investigations and made the following suggestions. Once a series is identified, the same crime scene personnel should be utilized at related scenes to promote consistency in evidence identification and collection. Search personnel should follow established sterilization procedures to ensure there is no cross-contamination between the various crime scenes. Cross-contamination should be proactively prevented by using different personnel to process crime scenes than those used to collect known sample evidence from potential suspects. And you can imagine, you go to, you could picture, like, if you go, you could probably compare it in your mind to, like, you go to McDonald's, you go to Burger King, you see somebody wearing gloves to fix your food. Then you see them wearing gloves to take your money. Then they're wearing gloves to get the food. So you can kind of get you can kind of picture the cross-examination, because you don't want to use those same gloves to take somebody's money that you do to prepare food. So you don't want to do that with the gloves when you're doing crime scenes as well. Documentation among the law enforcement agencies should be standardized to ensure continuity between separate cases. Aerial photographs of every crime scene, as well as accompanying ancillary scenes should be taken. Aerial photographs clearly depict the geography of the area and demonstrate the physical relationships and the distances between the crime scenes. They also identify potential routes of ingress and egress to the area. The number of laboratories and experts involved in serial murder investigations should be limited to properly certified facilities and personnel. Ideally, all evidence should be examined by a single crime laboratory, and that lab should utilize only one expert per discipline. If this is not possible, establish lines of communication between laboratories to ensure the sharing of pertinent information related to the investigation, because communication is so important. Priority status for laboratory examination should be obtained to ensure a quick turnaround on test results. When consulting with forensic scientists, investigators should prioritize forensic examinations based upon their potential investigative value. In addition, forensic scientists should be consulted frequently to identify alternative sampling and/or testing that may lead to successful case resolution. Forensic testimony should be limited to what is needed for successful prosecution. Utilization of charts, graphs, or other appropriate audiovisual aids showing forensic linkages will clearly and succinctly convey the facts of the case. When necessary, investigators should seek independent secondary reviews of laboratory results. This may be somewhat problematic, since there are crime laboratories that will not duplicate forensic examinations. However, exceptions are sometimes made to this policy on a case-by-case basis. So here we are at forensic evidence case, and we're almost to the bottom of the page. So it says, no, it goes on. That's just something else. Oh, yeah. So let's finish this little part right here. It says, the case of a serial child murderer, Richard Marks, evidence highlights the variety of forensic testing that may be utilized to solve different cases. In 1996 and 1997, in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, 3 young girls were abducted from their residences, sexually assaulted, and killed. The first case occurred on September 9th, 1996, when Sophia Silva disappeared from the front porch of her house. That is horrific. She was found in October of 1996 in a swamp 16 miles from her residence. A suspect was arrested and charged for her murder based on a faulty trace evidence examination conducted by a state laboratory. On May 1st, 1997, 2 sisters, Kristen and Katie Lisk, disappeared from the residence after returning home from school. Their bodies were discovered 5 days later in a river 40 miles from the residence. After an examination by an FBI laboratory examiner yielded trace evidence that positively linked the Silva and Lisk homicides to a common environment, the suspect arrested in the Silva case was subsequently released. The investigation continued for an additional 5 years until a girl was abducted in South Carolina. The victim was able to escape, and she identified Richard Mark Evidence as her attacker. Evidence fled South Carolina and was sighted in Florida. After a high-speed chase with police, Evidence committed suicide. The investigation revealed that Evidence had lived in Spotsylvania in 1996 and 1997. Forensic searches were conducted on Evidence's residence in South Carolina, his former residence in Spotsylvania, Virginia, and his car. A detailed trace examination of the evidence from these searches and the evidence obtained from the 3 victims revealed a number of hair and fiber matches, providing sufficient evidence to tie evidence. His name sounds like evidence. To tie evidence to the 3 murders. The following trace examinations linked Evidence. I wonder if his name's Evidence, but I don't know. To all 3 homicide victims. There was fibers from a bath mat, fibers from an Afghan. It must have been his favorite Afghan or something, I don't know. Fibers from 2 separate carpets in his former home in Virginia. Carpet fibers from the trunk of his car, head hair that belonged to him. So his hair, and so they've got all these different fibers, and it's not just one fiber, but it's several. A trace examination also linked fibers from a pair of fur-lined handcuffs, oh yeah, to the 3 homicide victims and the surviving victim. The unique combination of different hair and fiber evidence yielded the common environment to which all the victims and the offender were exposed. So these fibers, they're going to last some time, and they have them, they thoroughly vacuum. Some places, I think they said they vacuum them in like separate squares sometimes in different places, but I'm not positive. But they have all these different types of fibers, and then they show it. So yeah, and here's an image, and you can go look up this book, and you can read it, and you can look at these images, and they have a lot, publication, and they have a lot of interesting publications, not just this one. So it says latent fingerprints belonging to Kristen Lisk were located on the inside of the trunk lid of his car. Because I'm sure, yeah, he's cleaning his car, but who's going to even think to clean the inside of the trunk lid? 5 years after the fact, her fingerprints are still there. So here we are at number 8, prosecution of serial murder cases. So I'm going to leave off right here and end this video. But this is such an interesting publication, and it has so much information. So I thought, well, as I study and read different things, I think I'm just going to share them and we can study them together. Please feel free to leave comments. And if you have information that you can share, please share that information in the comments. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day. Bye-bye.